Chapter 1, The Prison Door. At the beginning of the story, we have a description of a prison. Many bearded men. Just notice some of the things I have underlined here. Just the description of their clothing, sad, gray. The door itself is old, heavy, timbered, iron spikes, very dark. We get a real clear sense here of Nathaniel Hawthorne's sarcastic tone. Whatever utopia of human virtue and happiness they might originally project, have invariably recognized it among their earliest practical necessities to allot a portion of the virgin soil as a cemetery and a prison. So clearly people die when they're coming to America because life is hard. Clearly people are put in prison. So this is just a reminder. Hopefully, if you have read the introduction like we did in that first video, you'll remember that Nathaniel Hawthorne feels a need to atone for the sins of his ancestors, that this Puritan time period was very dark in his opinion in terms of America's national sort of history. So this prison is described here. Again, the oaken door looks more antique than anything else in the New World. So clearly this implies that the prison is heavily used. A lot of people have come and gone from that door. Then we have a contrast. There's a reference to the black flower of civilized society is a prison. So this is obviously a negative connotation, a black flower, but that like every civilized society, unfortunately, has to have a place for criminals. But next to the prison door is a wild rose bush covered in this month of June with its delicate gems, which might be imagined to offer their fragrances and fragile beauty to the prisoner as he went in, and to the condemned criminal as he came forth to his doom, in token that the deep heart of nature could pity and be kind to him. So it's this reference of, there is still beauty in the world, there is still forgiveness in the world. So clearly the roses are a symbol. This early in the book, you don't have to know what all the symbols mean. I just think it's important to recognize when there's a contrast like this, to recognize that this is on purpose by the author. And it's interesting, too, that the rose bush is even living, because a lot of nature in this area has been destroyed just from weather, from development of these little settlements. And it says that possibly this rose bush had sprung up under the footsteps of the sainted Anne Hutchinson as she entered the prison door. We shall not take upon us to determine. So this is a reference to a real person. Anne Hutchinson was a woman who was considered to be a witch. She was banished from the colony because she had different religious beliefs. She did not follow the Puritan beliefs. She felt that an individual person could have their own personal relationship with God, and that it wasn't so dictated by the church. And so she is an inspiration for Hester Prynne. Finding it so directly on the threshold of our narrative, which is now about to issue from that inauspicious portal, we could hardly do otherwise than pluck one of its flowers and present it to the reader. So literally, Hawthorne is reaching out to us, giving us a flower, this sense of hope, this sense of a different sort of life for people. I just wanted to point out that if you were to look up Anne Hutchinson today, I think almost every online reference I see to her, her name is spelled with an E, A-N-N-E. Hawthorne spells her name without an E. And I think it's really strange to me that we have changed the spelling of her name. A-N-N, I mean, this is my name, so I definitely know this, is an English version of the name Anne, and A-N-N-E is the French version. Who are we to change the spelling of her name? I think that's so strange. Anne Hutchinson, like all the settlers, was English. She came from England, so it would make sense that that was how her name was spelled. I just think it's really strange that it is different now when I look up her history. So this is a nice short chapter. Most of the chapters will not be like this. This is sort of like opening the door to the story, literally. So we continue in the marketplace, and it talks about the people who are watching. There's some vocabulary here amongst any other population, or as a later period in the history of New England, the grim rigidity that petrified the bearded I can't even say this word, physiognomies. The physiognomies are facial features. So it's just the expressions on their faces would have augured some awful business in hand. So what that means is that just by the expressions on the people's faces as they watch this prison door, you would think that something horrible happened. It could have betokened nothing short of anticipation of an execution of some noted culprit. So to betokened is to show or to indicate. So there are not a crazy amount of words like this, but it is a little intimidating to see two words like this in the first paragraph of the second chapter. What they're describing here is that literally it could be anyone coming out of that prison door. Many, many people have been put in prison for being even the slightest bit different from the traditional Puritan population, and that's what's being described here. It also, I think, is important to notice that the people are very solemn as they watch. It says here, this befits them because they are people who believe that religion and law are identical, and whose character both were so thoroughly interfused that the mildest and severest acts of public discipline were alike made venerable and awful. So they are very bound to religion and law, very inflexible about what is right and what is wrong. Just to remind you again, some of these things could be quiz questions. This is occurring in June, so it's a summer morning when the story begins. And I think it's interesting to notice how the women are behaving compared to the men. The women are taking a peculiar interest in whatever penal infliction might be expected to ensue. Every successive mother had transmitted to her child a fainter bloom, a more delicate and briefer beauty, and a slighter physical frame, if not character of less force and solidity than her own. So they're describing here the fact that the older women are very sturdy. It talks about them having broad shoulders, well-developed busts, round and ruddy cheeks that were similar to how they looked when they lived in England. But their children, their offspring, are fainter, not as beautiful. They're withering, which indicates that life is hard, that maybe they're not being well nourished, that they're not being allowed to grow and develop and be happy, perhaps even that too. So this is sort of describing just the older women compared to the younger women. There was, moreover, a boldness and rotundity of speech among these matrons, as most of them seem to be, that would startle us at the present day, whether in respect to its purport or its volume of tone. So they were bold and loud. They're sort of gossipy. And as we're going to see here, they think that the men have not been tough enough on the woman who is about to exit the prison. It says here, I'll tell you a piece of my mind. It would be greatly for the public behoove if we women, being of mature age and church members in good repute, should have the handling of such malefactresses of this Miss Hester Prynne. So they're like, we should be punishing her. We're in much better position to do that. They would be tougher on her because they feel that she has, violated sort of a code of honor, a code of behavior that women care about. People say, said another, that the Reverend Master Dimmesdale, her godly pastor, takes it very grievously to heart that such a scandal should have come upon his congregation. So this is a character. This is a very important character. Reverend Dimmesdale is going to be throughout this entire book, and I think this is important to keep in mind that the minister of a Puritan community is the head of that community. The congregation is the entire colony. So all these people go to the same church. They have the same minister. The Reverend is a very important person, and they are definitely going to do whatever he says. And so the fact that he feels grievous about this, sad about it, indicates he's not necessarily angry about it. He feels terrible about it. And so I think that's what we have to kind of keep in mind, that that's probably how he would want his parishioners to feel, like that this is a sad day, not necessarily an evil day. And then these women say, at the very least, they should have put the brand of a hot iron on Hester Prynne's forehead. The naughty baggage, little will she care that they put upon the bodice of her gown. So remember from the introduction that Nathaniel Hawthorne was inspired to write this story because he envisioned like a red scarlet letter embroidered with gold thread. And that's exactly, that's the name of this book. That's exactly what Hester Prynne will be wearing when she comes out of the prison. And these women are saying they should have branded her with a hot iron on her face, which is absolutely horrible. But interposed more softly a young wife, holding a child by the hand. Let her cover the mark as she will. The pang of it will always be in her heart. So a younger woman empathizes with her and can imagine that she will always feel the pain, regardless of how she is marked by the letter. Someone else says, this woman has brought shame upon us and ought to die. One person's sin in the Puritan community is horrible for everybody. And so some people think she should be killed. So these could be quiz questions. Hush now, gossips, for the lock is turning in the prison door, and here comes Mistress Prynne herself. So out she comes, a black shadow emerging into the sunshine, and look at how she is described. The grim and grisly presence of the town beadle. This is the jailer, basically, with a sword by his side and his staff of office in his hand. This personage prefigured and represented in his aspect the whole dismal severity of the Puritanic code of law. So the man who is the keeper of the jail keys represents everything about the strict code of law in Puritan society. Stretching from the official staff in his left hand, he laid his right upon the shoulder of a young woman, whom he thus drew forward until at the threshold of the prison door she repelled him. So she shakes him off by an action marked with natural dignity and force of character, and stepped into the open air as if by her own free will. She bore in her arms a child, a baby of some 3 months old. So I think this could also be a quiz question. The baby is 3 months old, and she is stepping out on her own. She initially clasps the infant closely to her bosom to conceal the scarlet letter on her dress. But then she realizes that the token of her shame, one really doesn't hide the other, because obviously the baby is a baby born out of wedlock. The baby represents her sin of adultery, and as does the scarlet letter. So then we finally have the description: on the breast of her gown in fine red cloth, surrounded with an elaborate embroidery and fantastic flourish of gold thread, appears the letter A. It was so artistically done and with such fertility, notice these are important words, and gorgeous luxuriance of fancy, that it had all the effect of a last and fitting decoration to the apparel which she wore, in which was of a splendor in accordance with the taste of the age, but greatly beyond what was allowed by the sumptuary regulations of the colony. So she's dressed too nicely. These Puritan women are, they dress very plainly. She is wearing something a little more stylish, so she is very much a rebel. She has perfect elegance. She has dark and abundant hair. She's beautiful with rich complexion, a marked brow, which indicates that she's, quick and smart and expressive. She has deep black eyes. She's also ladylike. She's dignified. These are all things that you could be asked on a quiz. And never had Hester Prynne appeared more ladylike in the antique interpretation of the term than as she issued from the prison. So she's really stepping out with a lot of style, which indicates that she is a rebel. She is not going to be shamed by this situation. Her beauty shone out and made a halo of that misfortune and ignominy in which she was enveloped. So she actually looks stunning, honestly. She has a desperate recklessness of her mood. She's definitely very emotional. How can you not be? But she definitely, I think we could say, is an emotional woman to have done something unconventional. So we have the Scarlet Letter. They can finally all see it, and look how it's capitalized, so fantastically embroidered and illuminated upon her bosom. It had the effect of a spell, taking her out of the ordinary relations with humanity and enclosing her in a sphere by herself. So she is, I would think of her in this moment as the future, something beyond. She's embodying what a human can be, not necessarily just an obeying, Puritan member of society. It's clear here that she made the Scarlet Letter herself, because someone says, she hath good skill at her needle. That's certain. Why gossips? What is it but to laugh in the faces of our godly magistrates and make a pride out of what they, worthy gentlemen, meant for a punishment? We shouldn't compliment her ability because this is supposed to be a punishment. So these women, I think, are conflicted by what they see. I mean, she's way prettier than them, and she's probably better at sewing than they are, but they have to remind themselves, this is supposed to be a punishment. They say they would like to take off her nice clothes and give her, a rag of their own to make sort of like a very crude Scarlet Letter, so it wouldn't be so beautiful. So finally, someone says, be quiet. We don't want her to hear us. We don't want her to know we're complimenting her. So finally, she keeps coming forward, and she has to walk through to the town, which is not terribly far, where she's going to have to sort of endure her punishment. And it says here that she sets forth towards the place of punishment, to the marketplace. For haughty as her demeanor was, she perchance underwent an agony from every footstep of those that thronged to see her, as if her heart had been flung into the street for them all to spurn and trample upon. So she loses her nerve a little bit as she starts walking through the town, because she knows that all these people are there to mock her and to judge her. And as she walks, they're walking with her, and it's a terrible feeling. Finally, she comes to what is sort of what they describe as a scaffold. So we're going to get a lot of descriptions here. Basically, this is like a platform in the middle of the marketplace. It's about, maybe 4 feet high or so. And what they have there is a pillory. Now, I don't know if you know what a pillory is. It's described here. It's something where you would stand. It's like a wooden panel, and there's a hole cut out for your head to go in. If you've ever gone to a pumpkin farm, you'll see these where you stick your head through a hole and then you stick your hands through 2 holes, and sometimes there's like a funny animal painted on the front or something. This was a way to publicly shame criminals, where they would make you stand with your head through this hole. And of course, it would be very uncomfortable because you're leaning forward. So it's not a guillotine. They're not chopping your head off, but you're standing there to be shamed. And so they still have the pillory there. That is not what Hester has to do. She does not have to stick her head in the hole, but she just has to stand there and let everyone stare at her, and just let everyone stare at the Scarlet Letter on her dress. What's interesting here is there's a reference to the Virgin Mary. Had there been a papist among the crowd of Puritans, he might have seen in this beautiful woman, so picturesque in her attire and mien, and with her infant at her bosom, an object to remind him of the image of divine maternity, which so many illustrious painters have vied with one another to represent. She seems to have like a sacred image of sinless motherhood, whose infant was to redeem the world. So we're definitely getting the sense here that, yes, of course, adultery is a terrible thing. To have a child out of wedlock, especially in those times, was a terrible thing. But it's not only terrible. There's obviously some good in it, and we're going to be learning what that is. Also, people are watching her with awe, such as it always must invest the spectacle of guilt and shame in a fellow creature before society shall have grown corrupt enough to smile instead of shuddering at it. So some people are smiling, some people are shuddering. It's this idea that when you see someone who's done something wrong, that there can be a mix of responses to that. And on this next page, we're going to find out that because there are many men of law and obviously of the church there, the presence of men no less dignified than the governor, his counselors, a judge, a general, the ministers of the town, all of whom sat or stood in a balcony of the meeting house looking down upon the platform. When such personages could constitute a part of the spectacle without risking the majesty or reverence of rank and office, it was safely to be inferred that the infliction of a legal sentence would have an earnest and effectual meaning. Accordingly, the crowd was somber and grave. So there's a change in the behavior. If you think about the women making sarcastic comments and mean comments about her as she left the prison, when they get to the marketplace and they're watching her stand up there in shame, they become somber and grave. Of an impulsive and passionate nature, she had fortified herself to encounter the stings and venomous stabs of public contumely, wreaking itself in every variety of insults. But there was a quality so much more terrible in the solemn mood of the popular mind. So Hester Prynne had sort of prepared herself to be mocked, but she's struggling intellectually and emotionally with the solemn attitude. It makes her feel really terrible. She almost wishes people were laughing at her, but instead they're just staring at her so solemnly, and it's starting to affect her psychologically. She has the desire to shriek out. She feels like she might go mad. She wants to come down off that scaffold. Yet there were intervals when the whole scene in which she was the most conspicuous seemed to vanish from her eyes. And so this is interesting, like when you think about standing in front of people and you can't speak and they're not speaking, like what do you do? After she has these sort of feelings of panic, she starts to think about her life. She starts to reminisce her past. When she was a child, when she was in school, doing sports, little things she did, domestic things she would do with her mother in her home. This would have been back in England. Perhaps it was an instinctive device of her spirit to relieve itself by the exhibition of these phantasmagoric forms from the cruel weight and hardness of the reality. Like she escapes these judging stares by thinking about her past. Standing on that miserable eminence, she saw again her native village in Old England, her paternal home. Her old home, was gray stone. It was poverty-stricken. Remember, many times people came to America as colonists to sort of have a better life, certainly to have religious freedom, which is what the Puritans are doing at this moment. She sees her father's face. She sees her mother's face. She sees her own face glowing with girlish beauty. And then she remembers another face of a man well stricken in years, a pale, thin, scholar-like visage with eyes dim and bleared by the lamplight that had served them to pore over many ponderous books. So we don't know who this is, but it's a man in her life. Yet those same bleared optics had a strange, penetrating power when it was their owner's purpose to read the human soul. This figure of the study and the cloister, as Hester Prynne's womanly fancy failed not to recall, was slightly deformed, with the left shoulder a trifle higher than the right. So just mark this. We don't know. It's normal to question. Just mark it. Next rose before her in her memory's picture gallery, the intricate and narrow thoroughfares, the tall gray houses. So she's back remembering all the places where she has traveled. And then she finally comes back to this Puritan settlement with all the townspeople assembled, leveling their stern regard on her. Could it be true? She clutched the child so fiercely to her breast that it sent forth a cry. So she's like back in reality, and she's like, oh my God, is this actually happening to me? She turned her eyes downward at the scarlet letter and even touched it with her finger to assure herself that the infant and the shame were real. Yes, these were her realities. All else had vanished.